You should be able to see the screen now, right?
Yes.
Great. Let's see. Okay. I'll make a quick introduction for this, the first masterclass. As you probably all know, it's part of the project Culture Climate Exchange, and this is the masterclass that will prepare the partners for the upcoming workshops that's going to be in Lithuania and Latvia in the spring. And in this first masterclass, we're going to explore shared frameworks on ethics and opportunities in co-creation so that we have a common language for this kind of
One coming in.
I'll just emit another one. Just a second. Yes, people will just join during the presentation, so no problem. First of all, I'll just give a quick introduction to the whole project. So Culture Climate Exchange is a project that empowers young people to move from this eco-anxiety, and we'll do that by linking cultural history with nature awareness and the regenerative thinking, so that the project is able to strengthen cultural institutions, in this case for democratic spaces for youth and engagement. And in the end, we hope we are able to make a methodology that we can scale to likewise institutions. So that's more or less what the aim of the project is about. So this is for strengthening youth. It's for making giving cultural institutions more, you can say, yeah, also strength. And and for also for the society, so that we can build a more resistant society by putting on this methodology. And in the end, it should also be about policy, so that our policymakers can learn from this project and involve more youth into their process decision making. Yeah. So that this is the project starts with knowledge about cultural history, where we put in knowledge to the young people's head. And the Earthways are with us today to put in the empathic nature view, so that the young people will make them emotional, knowledgeable. Yeah. And in the end, with co-creation, this will make a process that will lead the young people into a more action, to join some more youth community action groups by combining these methodologies. That's more or less the presentation for the project. And just this is what the project is gonna concentrate about. So we have the preliminary phase, which is these master classes, and then we have a mapping and a youth segmentation analysis, where we also would like you, the partners, to contribute with all the knowledge they have about how they recruit young people into their projects. Then we have the kickoff conference, and I think we almost have the dates. It's in the end of January, so you could maybe put that into your calendars. And then we have where we are gonna present the preliminary phase and the mapping. And then we have the youth engagement phase, where we have some questionnaires for the young people that you're gonna bring into the project, and co-creative workshops where we are gonna join you with the task force to help you with the workshops. And then we have the analysis of all the data from the case countries, in this case Lithuania, Denmark, and Latvia. And the next phase is going to be the toolbox development, where partners co-create the scalable toolbox of all the findings in this project. And then we have a final conference where we are gonna present the whole project and all the findings in the project. So that's the project, and this is the beginning of the project, the master classes that you're doing right now. Yes.
Yes, and who are we? We are here today. We're gonna do a short presentation each, MARC and Earthways. From MARC, it's me, Anna Louise, and I'm a museum curator at MARC and a historian. And we have Mike, who's just presented and said welcome to you all, who is educated in tourism and business development. And what you see here on the screen is our museum, just to give you an idea of where we're located. There's an old farm. Can you see if you have the mouse? Can they see the mouse? I don't know. But you can see the town at the back of the picture, then a big lake, and then the stream going down, and all the fields, all the meadows, all the heath, all the plantation, and the belong to the museum. So we have a big outdoor museum with no walls, you might say, where we use nature very much in our work, because here in Billund municipality in Denmark, nature and culture is the same thing. It's people leaving their mark through time on nature and developing cultural landscapes. So this is what we work with. And if you press down further, just to quickly show you where do we come from, who are we? So we have this Pokeball, you might say, that all the employees work on once a year, all together with no hierarchy between the leadership and all the employees. And we have this vision, the star that we're never going to reach, but we want to, which is that MARC is a democratic meeting place that brings people together around our cultural heritage and fosters communities and action for a regenerative future. That's what we want to achieve. And how we achieve it is our mission. MARC creates moving museum experiences that open spaces for conversation, emotion, and action. We invite people into meaningful communities centered on the histories of agriculture, industry, and tourism. That's because that's the three historical points that we work with at MARC. We explore the past connected to today's challenges and opportunities and work together to shape a sustainable future. And we do that through some core values: courage, passion, integrity, and openness. And we just wanted to show you this because when I go on and talk later about co-creation, this is going to make a lot of sense in how we co-create and why we co-create and what sort of a mindset that the institution needs to have when you do this. And you?
Right. So today, Jesper and my name is Jeppe, are here representing Earthways. We're a small learning NGO working with what we call nature-based education and regeneration. So just to quickly say something about myself, my name is Jeppe. I have a background in environmental sciences and narrative sociology. I've been working as a teacher for a lot of years, and in the last 4 or 5 years, been working with Jesper around nature, what we call nature-based education. So we've worked a lot with young people and working with their view of themselves in this time, really, and also working with a lot of young people who are thinking about the climate crisis and thinking about the future, asking themselves some fundamental existential questions. What even makes sense in this time when the future looks the way it does. And so we are based in about an hour from here, where you saw this picture, at a farm called Himmelbjerggården, where we have teaching facilities in nature as well. So we do a lot of courses, seminars, workshops with people to work with their understanding of nature, and really also the understanding of ourselves, human beings, in light of our cultural history. The way that we see ourselves right now really matters to what kind of future we create. So if we see human beings simply as being these destructive force on the planet, which is, of course, very true, then we are likely to go on being a destructive force. And we are interested in finding out what are the other roles that are available to us as human beings. If we want to move towards a regenerative future, we also need to find a role for human beings being regenerators of nature, nature being the whole thing, outside and inside. So that was a very brief fly-in to the work that we do. We'll tell a little bit more about the background and the practices of our work. We are here in these masterclasses to help with working with both the nature understanding, facilitation aspect, but also designing some of the aspects of your projects. So that was me, and then I talked a lot about Earthways. Do you want to say a little bit about your background, Jesper?
Well, briefly, my name is Jesper. I'm an ecologist, and I have been working 40 plus years in the field of regeneration, permaculture, sustainability, and so on, both, as Jeppe said, in the teaching area in Denmark, but also a lot internationally. I've been working in many countries all over the world, in Nepal and Bhutan and Bolivia and Ghana and so on. So together with Jeppe, we 5 years ago formed this organization called Earthways, and that sort of was also, to me, a way of understanding that I think we have come to a point where, at least the way I see it, the main problem, you could say, that we need to address is the way we relate to nature. Because, I mean, we definitely can see that our understanding of ourselves as being outside nature, or nature being outside ourselves, have led to this crisis we are in with ecological problems, climate change, and so on. And therefore, we, as Jeppe just described, we work a lot with this approach on nature connectedness, embeddedness, interconnectedness, and regenerative learning. And we will tell more in detail on our approach at the end of this session. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. And this is just a quick overview of what's going to happen today. I'm going to talk a lot, so I hope that you'll cope with that. I'm going to talk about co-creation, how we do it at BARC. We've been co-creating with our users for the last 8 years. Then we're going to have some breakout sessions where you are going to discuss in groups some things that we just talked about. I'm going to dive into the levels of co-creation and the power dynamics, challenges, institutional barriers, and then another breakout sessions, and then finish it off with ethics and responsibility. Then we're all going to have break, and then Earthways is going to talk about the regenerative thinking and their approaches, and then we're going to say thank you for today, wrap it up, and talk about the next steps, because this is number 1 out of 3 masterclasses. So it's much about the method and the process of co-creation, and from a cultural institution and museum's point of view, and then the nature's point of view as well, in a combination. Yes, co-creation. There are some definitions or some key concepts of co-creation, and the definition or core idea of co-creation is that it's about developing something new in collaboration between users, citizens, visitors, experts, professionals. The point is that no single party has full control over the outcome, and all contribute with ideas, knowledge, and experience. So the key point is that the decision-making power and the ownership is shared. So the characteristics here are an open process. The outcome is not predetermined. We have shared responsibility and influence. Participants have genuine co-determination, mutual learning. All parties learn from each other. And this is quite important, focus on the process and relationships, not only the product. So the main point in co-creation is about inviting users in, not to a finished process, but it's about giving up control and then creating together. So that requires clear framework, trust, and openness, but I'm going to dive more into that. A related concept is citizen science, which is a form of public participation in research, where citizens, often with a scientific background, help collect and analyze and interpret some data. It can be used, it's mainly used in natural sciences, but can also be used in humanities and cultural heritage. Examples could be a local communities documenting biodiversity or changes in the landscape, or a museum asking users to photograph something like that. Citizen science is often part of co-creation processes, especially where there is research-based data or different projects, but it's often more professionally controlled, and it's often more limited in its user influence. But the main point here is that citizen science provides access to new data and engages people through this research, but co-creation goes further. So it's not just about participating, it's about defining, developing, and transforming together. And if we move on to participatory design, which I'm just going to call PD for my own sake, that's an approach which actually originated in Scandinavia in the 70s, where we designed a lot of furniture, you might say. And it's based on the idea that if you use a system or a solution, then you should be part of in designing it as well. So it's from concept to implementation. The characteristics are that the users actually participate in the entire design process. It's iterative processes. The ideas are tested, evaluated, and continuously improved. And then it focuses on everyday knowledge, what kind of life experience you have, and so on. In relation to co-creation, then co-creation in museums is often based on these ideas that the knowledge and meaning are not transferred, but created together in the moment. So PD is very, very close, and some might say it's two sides of a coin to co-creation. So just keep that in mind. And if we move on to the principles in co-creation, because co-creation is a collaboration-based process in which multiple participants collectively develop solutions, ideas, communications, products, whatever you want to develop. And co-creation requires that all the participants has the opportunity for real influence and shared ownership over the content and the outcomes of the process. So the core of co-creation is that the process is open and exploratory. The outcome is not predetermined. The participants bring different perspectives, experiences, resources into play. We have mutual learning, negotiation, and innovation that arises along the way. So co-creation differs from more, you might say, classical forms of user involvement, where users or participants only provide input or feedback to a predefined process or solution. So co-creation can challenge this traditional division between museum and user, and then it can create new roles and relationship between the institution and society. So the users are no longer just visitors, but they're co-creators and they're co-owners. This is a lot of, but we'll go through it together. It's another Pokeball, you might say, where we have defined through our experience with co-creation over the last 8 years and our research in the field as well, 6 principles that altogether becomes co-creation, you might say. If we start with shared purpose, which is a central principle in co-creation, is that all the parties involved work together to a shared goal. So it's not imposed from the outside, but it's formulated through dialogue between the participants. And this means that the project's direction must be developed collaboratively, and that all the participants must understand, acknowledge, and feel connected to this goal. And this is important because without a shared purpose, there's a risk of working in parallel rather than together. And a shared purpose creates motivation and meaningfulness, and it strengthens the sense of belonging and direction. If we move on to equality, then equality in co-creation means that all the participants' knowledge, experiences are recognized as valid. So regardless of whether one is an expert or one is a child or one is a citizen or a volunteer, it doesn't matter. Everyone's purpose is valid. So it's not about having the same role, but it's about everyone's voices that counts. And there's a room for this diversity in co-creation. And this is important because it gives the participants the courage and the desire to contribute. And you will see that later on in a case I'm going to share. And it creates a more nuanced and sustainable solutions, and it reduces the risk of merely using, you might say, participants as decoration. Openness. In co-creation, the result is not predetermined. Openness is about not seeking confirmation of one's own ideas, but being willing to change course, listen and learn along the way. It applies to both content, form, process, and roles, and also the very idea. Are we open as an institution for ideas from the outside? So this is important because it makes it possible to create something new. It ensures that the process can respond to participants' inputs and needs along the way, and it supports innovation and relevance. And then we've put ownership on as well as a key principle, because this is about feeling that your contribution actually has made a difference. So that the participants can recognize themselves, their ideas, and their perspective in the final result. This doesn't necessarily mean that everything turns out the way that they wish, but it means that there have been influence and responsiveness as well along the way. And this is important because it creates motivation, a long-term engagement. It increases the quality and sustainability of the results, and it prevents disappointment of feeling you've just been used for something. Then we have process focus, because the process in itself is actually part of the purpose when we talk about co-creation. It's not only about reaching a certain goal, but it's about creating something together and about what happens along the way. Because what happens is relationship developing, it's learning, it's reflection, it's empowerment, it's trust. All these things happen along the way. And this means that the social and interpersonal aspect becomes part of the quality of the co-creation process. So this is important because the process is often more meaningful for participants rather than the project is actually. And that a good processes create long-term relationship and collaborations between the participants and the institution, and it contributes to mutual respect and shared understanding. And then as the last key principle of co-creation, we have iteration, because co-creation is rarely linear. It's quite a dynamic and experimental and often chaotic process where iterating means that the ideas are being tested, that one sees what works, adjusts it, and tries it again. And it provides the opportunity to learn along the way. It also requires not to be afraid of making changes in the process, so that there need to be time and space for reflection and for change. And it's important because it makes it possible to incorporate feedback and learning along the way. It creates a more tested and usable result, and it gives participants a real sense of development and co-determination. And actually, at the museum, we have this thing called adoption of classes in the schools, where we adopt, so to speak, several classes in the school. We adopt them in the first grade, and then we follow them all the way up until the end of the school, to the 9th grade. And every time that we make a new school offer for other schools, then we use our adoptive classes to test and iterate and experiment and change and listen to their input before we make the final product. So in this way, MARK Museum uses it to be a user test project before we put many resources into it. So that could be an example. Yes. Then we have some related concepts which aren't quite co-creation, but they have, you might say, a deep relation to it, but there's some differences. And I just wanted to take you through these so that sometimes it's easier to explain what a thing is by explaining what is not. So this is what's going to happen now. If you take the first concept, user involvement, that's when users participate by providing input, typically through questionnaires, interviews, focus groups, or qualitative workshops, and the institution then manages and processes and makes the decision about how this input is being used. And this differs from co-creation because in users' involvement, the users' voices are heard, but they have no control over form, decision, or direction. And in co-creation, you require this joint development and not just feedback. Then you have a related concept called focus groups, which is structured feedback, you might say, and qualitative insights, where selected participants take part in a facilitated conversation of some sort. Focus groups are a form of user involvement where smaller groups participate in a controlled discussion over a specific topic. And this differs from co-creation because the participant statements are used as data, but they don't gain that ownership that I talked about before. So the institution interprets and uses the inputs on its own. So there's no ownership in this focus group. Then you have co-design, which is very, very close to co-creation, and one might say two sides of a coin here, where users actively and creatively participate in developing products, services, physical spaces, whatever. And the focus is often on design processes, for example, idea development, prototyping, testing. And as I said, it's very close to co-creation, but it tends to be quite product-orientated, whereas co-creation is also process-orientated. Co-creation can include co-design very much as a method, but you often have a broader and more democratic purpose in co-creation, for example, building relationships, solving shared problems, or changing a practice or something like that. And then citizenship, which I touched briefly upon in the beginning as well, where users or citizens actually participate in developing one's society or one's institutions, and the focus is on rights and responsibility and democratic practices. And this differs from co-creation because citizenship has, you might say, a normative framework, an ideal of what is an active and a participatory democracy, whereas co-creation is more practice-based. A descriptive point of view is how something actually is. So co-creation uses citizenship in concrete collaboration, where the citizen is not only consulted, but acts as an agent or as a co-creator. And then dialogue, we put in as well, because this is a practice focused on mutual understanding and exchange of perspectives. And dialogue can be oral, it can be written, it can be artistic or visual, it doesn't matter. But the aim is often to achieve understanding and not necessarily agreement here. So dialogue is a method for creating contact and understanding and relationship, but it's not necessarily lead to concrete action or concrete production. Whereas co-creation often build on dialogue, but it goes further because the parties produces something together. Like it could be knowledge, product, communication, or decisions, something like that. Yes, and then I'm gonna share a case so that all of this, you might say, theoretical knowledge that I've just presented maybe can be more concrete for you in your understanding of co-creation. This is a case here at Mark Museum where all these this group of young people, there are many more, they couldn't be in the picture, all of them. There are 12, 13, 14 years old, came to the museum and said, nobody listens to us. What are we going to do? And then we said, what do they listen to? And because here in where the museum is located, we have a very big pollution from a factory, like a huge national pollution from this factory. It's a very, very big deal. It's in the ground, it's in the water, it's everywhere. And especially here locally, this is a big part of our local heritage. And it's something that we work with here at Mark Museum as well. And these young people came to us and said, we know about this pollution. We know what it's going to affect. We know it's a big deal to clean it up. We know nobody wants to take the bill of cleaning up this pollution as well. But our parents doesn't listen to us. Our teachers don't listen to us. The society doesn't listen. The policymakers, the politicians, nobody listens to us because we are just children. And then we said to the young people, okay, then we're going to set the museum free. We're going to go into a co-creation process with you, where you have the museum, where you have the floor, you might say. The word is yours. What are you going to do with it? Of course, we have a framework for this. One of the frames is the co-creation process, which we determined a shared goal together, a shared purpose. How are we going to do this? Your voices count as much as our voices. Another framing was that we're a cultural institution. So this has to be about, you have to have a framework of your local heritage, of your local history, about this factory, or about other pollutions in nature that other factories or whatever has caused in our area. That was another framing. And the first framing was, we are a public museum. So if you're going to make an exhibition, which was what we determined together, a demonstration with these demonstrations signs you see here on the field, then you have to step up. It has to look like a professional exhibition for all our other users to come and enjoy. And they have to enjoy it in certain ways. So what happened was that they wanted to have this demonstration with the demonstration signs. They helped design it. They took a key statement, and I told them I'm not going to change a comma on this statement. It's your time now. So it says something like, I need your help. All the best nature is human guard. Hey, I'm not your trash can. All the best Mother Nature. What the hell were you thinking? Stuff like this they put on their demonstration signs. And then there's a QR code where you can scan it with your phone, and then the young people turn up in a video or in an audio, and then you hear about what does this statement, what's behind this statement, and they all chose their own statements, their own, I think this is most important to talk about. I'm most engaged in this concerning our cultural and natural heritage. And then I asked them, do you want to be anonymous? And they said, no, we do not want to be anonymous. So their names and their age and their picture are all on the signs. So here we have reflections, we have attitudes, we have very important statements growing up from the ground instead of crops. And then for the grand opening of our exhibition with these young people, we wanted to invite the families who didn't listen, the teachers who didn't listen, there's the society and the politicians who didn't listen. So we invited all of them because this was their time now. And I told the young people that we've got the mayor of the municipality to open the exhibition, and they said, we don't care about that. We want to have our own speeches. So 3 young people stood up in front of all of these people, society who didn't take them seriously before, and said thank you to the museum for finally having someone taking us seriously and finally giving us the word. And the young people actually became volunteers and still are volunteers at the museum now. So we have a long-term relationship. Yes, that was a case of one way you can do co-creation. Now we're gonna have a breakout session which is gonna last 15 minutes, and that's the only time you get, because then you're gonna get transported back into this main room, regardlessly of whether you're in the middle of an important.
Okay, we hope that you had some good discussions, and that if somebody wants to share something, now is the time. What about you, Ekaterina? You had some good discussions?
You know, we were slow with the introduction to the session. We loved to see each other in this small room, and we just started discussing third question, which is crucial for the project. So for us also, it was important to understand how each organization is going to work with, how the process of working with a group of children and youngsters is going to be arranged so that it would be returning group or something. Because in museums, we usually get the situation when group of children or youngsters comes, spends several hours and then leaves to their part of the country, back to their part of the country, and do not come next week, for example, or next day. So that's one of the questions to speak about, this process of co-creation and cooperation. So that several questions were risen, and also we shared the experience of each organization involved, how we arrange this co-creation, and how much institutions are inclined to get to work with this power, how, to give up the power it gets.
And Latvia? How did you, what did you discuss in your group?
It was quite difficult, but mostly we were sharing our experience from Edward Swedenbaum's museum, because I would say that we already are working in this framework of co-creation. We have very strong youth group, non-formal, with what we are working for years, and so we were sharing our experience, how we are organizing quite big culture and art festival with our youngsters, and the power, how we are dividing with them. I would say they have 80% of the power and we have 20% of the power. And for our museum, it's very important. We cannot imagine how we could work in a different way if we would not use this co-creation framework. And yeah, and it's very challenging, of course, for museum to give this authority to participants, and it's completely different kind of work than with school groups which are just coming and spending like 1 or 2 hours in a museum and then they never came again. But if you are building this long-term relationship with youngsters or youth centers or with schools, then it's like the way how you can co-create, and we really think that we have quite a good experience, and we are already working in that kind of way. So that was what was our discussion, more or less.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if I didn't mention, but we just joined some of the rooms just to maybe support you guys and maybe have listened to some of your discussions. So maybe Jeppe could also
Yeah,
say a bit about it.
I was it's really interesting to hear because as a teacher, I think your work is slightly different. Of course, you're also working with communication and with teaching, but in the class, like especially this question, how do we create frameworks where all participants can experience ownership is slightly different, but there are some similarities where I could hear in the group also what Ekaterina was saying about a process where you basically hand over responsibility to citizens to design these furniture in an urban environment. And what is the balance between how much ownership of the process you keep and how much you let go? And as a teacher, I find there is sort of like you need to keep some ownership. If you let go too much ownership, then in my classes, for example, then the teaching has been derailed my point of the class was to teach about nature relationship, but if I opened up to it could go anywhere, we go in a different direction. So I'm very interested in how can we learn from each other in the different projects. What is the right balance between having a project which has clear aims, which has values, which has some objectives, and then creating a space where participants feel ownership, and that you find this, where is the point, the touch point where you let go as much as you can while keeping enough of I don't want to say control, but that's the words that's coming up. Keeping enough ownership for the steering group that you're still going in the right direction. So this was my question from hearing some of the different ways or different examples that I listened in on.
That's really interesting, and it's a good leading on point to what we're going to discuss now. Because, and as you saw or heard in the case that I just shared from Mark Museum, that was not free play. There was degrees of control, degrees of frameworking that we agreed upon in the process. And I'm gonna use the word control a lot now. So cover your ears. So if you move on,
Could I just,
yes,
just what I was listening to in the other group was that I can see that it's the situation in the museums are quite challenging in that way that, as you have mentioned, I mean, you have maybe most participants just coming once for a couple of hours and so on. And there, in this situation, I guess it's very difficult to work in the way we just talked about. But then how do you actually, when you have these longer term contexts, that must be with more local people, I guess. And how do you sort of invite into a long-term relationship? And I think that is really crucial then, that these people feel some kind of ownership and can also, I mean, be allowed to contribute and see it as a way for them also to explore some very existential maybe or essential questions for them.
And take action upon.
Yeah, and then take action. So it's like dealing with the role of museums, whether it's an exhibition place or whether it's a local, what do you call it? Meeting place or place where you actually interact with your local society. Yeah.
Very true. Now we're going to talk about some degrees of control in co-creation, because control concerns who sets the direction for the process and how much control the museum or the facilitator retains when working in a co-creative way. So co-creation is often about shared power, but that does not necessarily mean that everything must be unstructured. It doesn't mean that everything is completely shared. Rather, it is a question of gradual opening and awareness about where in the process the control lies and with whom. So this awareness is quite important for all the participants. We often talk about 3 typical degrees of control listed here on the screen. One is framed co-creation. That's where the institution sets the framework, the theme, and the process, but the participants are involved in the development and content creation. So an example of this could be a museum invites a school class to create their climate, what can you say, war within predefined exhibition concepts, where they can, so if we here at MARC, for example, have a predefined exhibition concept, but it's open for inputs and ideas and painting and graffiti and feelings and perspectives. Would you want my charger, as well? So this is an exhibition where there's a framed co-creation method that you can use. Then we talk about shared leadership, where frameworks and themes are agreed upon through dialogue, and participants have influence on both form and content, and the institution and participants lead together. And then open co-creation, where participants have the freedom to define the purpose, the content, the format themselves. Like the case study I just showed you, the institution provides the platform and the support of this co-creation example. So key points about control is that co-creation, you can just, I've been through all this. Co-creation does not mean an absence of control, but rather a clarification and a negotiation of control. A high degree of participant influence still requires strong facilitation, structure, and clarity regarding roles and responsibilities in the process. It's important to align these expectations. So what can participants help to decide and what has already been determined in advance? So this is important to align these things. And special consideration when working with children and young people is that children should not simply be set free, you might say. They need clear frameworks and support to participate meaningfully. Work must use age-appropriate methods as well, structures that foster safety and confidence for the participants. Power should be negotiated and not just handed over, because children must be able to say both yes and no in these co-creation contexts. So the risks of unclear control is unclear expectations, you might say. Participants believe that they have more influence than they actually do, and that it turns into disappointment and breach of trust. It can be over control, that the process feels like false participation, where everything has actually been decided in advance. And it can be under control, where the process lacks direction and participants become uncertain or passive or frustrated in this. So the conclusion of this is that controlling co-creation is not about all or nothing. It's about making conscious choices when you design the process of co-creation. Who controls what, when, and why? Are we clear about this with the participants? Can we adjust the level of control along the way through evaluation along the way? And working with degrees on control is about finding this balance between openness and responsibility, structure and freedom, and framework and flexibility. So this, we're gonna dive closer into some of these things. This is just masterclass number 1, so keep that in mind, where we're just gonna talk quite, what can you say, on a higher level about co-creation, and then we're gonna dive into some of the facilitation and some of the other methods that can support in designing our co-creation workshops in the spring. Yes, if you move on to challenges, because co-creation is not challenge-free, not at all, and you probably know this as well. It's often highlighted as this democratic and in a way of thinking, of working, and we do that as well in this masterclass. But in practice, it contains a number of concrete and recurring challenges that can hinder the quality and sustainability of the process. So I'm going to list some of these things where resource consumption, especially time and energy, is a big challenge here. Co-creation processes are time consuming. It requires time for planning, involvement, trust building, dialogue, iterative development. And this can be very difficult to allocate in organizations who are characterized by operations or deadlines or whatever you have other things on your plate. It can be emotionally demanding as well. Participants and employees are often to invest emotions and personal engagement in this because you come quite close to each other in building a relationship in the processes. So this is something you have to be aware of, so it doesn't lead to being a place where you need to handle tensions or differences. And then you can underestimate the complexity as well of co-creation, because many institutions embark on co-creation without understanding how demanding it is in practice. So don't underestimate the real amount of time required to actually co-create. Another challenge can be differing expectations, different understanding of what co-creation is. Some participants expect real influence, while the institution in practice only seeks input. So this is quite important to make yourself clear of this. It can be lack of alignment when there are no clear agreements on roles or responsibilities, misunderstanding, and then frustration can arise. And it can be expectation of outcomes. Some participate to learn, others to influence, and this can imbalance in a group, can be in an imbalance in a group dynamic, you might say. Another challenge is uncertainty or unpredictability. When there's no fixed plan, then openness and shared ownership means that no one does not always know what the outcome will be, and this can actually create uncertainty, insecurity, and especially in top-down organizations. And then it can be lack of process clarity. Without clear facilitation, the process risks stalling or developing in an uncoordinated way. And fear of losing professional or institutional control, that was one of the questions that you just debated. Staff may feel that their authority is challenged or that the professional standards are being diluted. So this very much has to be an organized, an institutional way of thinking, of working. And that's why I showed you our way of working in the beginning, where co-creation is not mentioned in one word, but it's in both the vision and the mission of our way of thinking. And touching upon more of this is the internal institutional challenges. That can be this resistance within the institution, and that's okay, but not all colleagues or managers are on board when you co-create, and there may be some skepticism towards the method and its value. You can have lack of management support. Co-creation requires the backing and the prioritization of the entire organization and not just a few dedicated individuals. Or you can have rigid project logic or economy. Everything is locked into budgets and plans, so it can be difficult to open up for participants' influence. Then you can have a challenge as communication problems. Different languages is a challenge in itself, and that's something that we need, that we already had discussed in this project, not as a different language between English or Lithuanian or Latvian or Danish, but also different languages between professionals and users, because professionals often speak in terms and system that does not make any sense to the participants. So we have to speak the same language, so to say. Then lack of information. Participants may not know enough about the framework or when they have influence, which creates uncertainty. And unclear challenge and contact persons. Who answers questions? When do we get the information? Where do we submit ideas? All these things. Another challenge is inclusion and inequality. Who gets invited into a co-creation process and who does not? It's also often the resourceful, the engaged, and the verbally strong who participate, but what about the others? Unequal access to participation, time to get there, transport, digital skills, sense of safety, affect who actually has the opportunity to take part in co-creation. Difference in expressions and in status. Some voices are taken more seriously than others, consciously or unconsciously, and that's something that we have to think about before we invite people into co-creation processes. And the last one that I'm going to talk about is cultural differences. Different collaboration cultures. Some participants are used to hierarchies, others to flat structures. This can cause friction. Unequal norms regarding authority, gender, age, expression, what is considered appropriate behavior and who dares to speak. Difference in language and values, culture, experience, background shape how people speak. It shapes how people listen and how they understand and engage in co-creation. And if you move on, then I'm just gonna show you, talk about a case where some of these challenges has risen in our case, and we're gonna talk openly about it. It's called Co-Created Collections, and a project 2.0 is Mosaic. And this is MARK Museum trying to share the power of who can decide what goes into a museum's collection. This is usually decided by a curator like me, by museum professionals, that we say this pen is very important because of its meaning in whatsoever. But what happens if we invite citizens, local citizens, young people, it doesn't matter, elderly, it doesn't matter, the user group, to say, what do you think is most important? What is the most important object in your life and why is it so important? And then we are obligated to put it into a museum collection under the Danish museum law. We invited several groups into doing this in co-created collection project, but there arose some challenges, like we don't know enough about this. You are the professionals, we are just the amateurs. We do not want to contribute. That was the first challenge we met. Then we met uncertainty about what is a museum collection at all. How can we put things into this museum collection? Why is it important? Why are you asking us? So there was a lot of hierarchy, authority, power challenges, and there was a lot of, you can say, structural, there was a lot of language barriers in terms like museum collection is not understandable for average Dane. So we decided to make another project based on co-created collection project called Mosaic, because most of the Danish people know what a museum exhibition is. So what if we combine this exhibition with our collection? So we ask people to co-create an exhibition with us where they choose the objects about resolving what is the most important object in your home. Why does it feel like home? Why do you think it's important to talk about? How would you describe it if you have to? And we worked with some other ethical groups than Danish in a language school located in a town nearby the museum, where we at first met the challenge that when you're not speaking Danish and talking about exhibitions and objects and wanted to put it into a Danish museum in a Danish exhibition, but we can have translated it as well, then that was the first barrier that we met. And the other barrier was, again, we are still not important enough to contribute into the museum collection. That must be a professional point of view and not our point of view. But it became easier along the way because we had put in a lot of time for building a relationship together, to building trust together, to have some workshops in the co-creation process where it just was about learning what is a museum, what is a Danish museum, what is our museum about, and why is that important, so that we became more connected in that relationship. So most of the barriers came down, and then they were more ready to contribute. But here we had challenges in what is the meaning about this, what is the shared purpose about this, why and how can we contribute, and why do you need that contribution, why can't you do it yourself? We had language challenges, both professional and amateur, and language in Danish and in whatever ethnical group you arise from. So this is just a case for showing you that when you co-create, not everything is this democratic and meaningful and wonderful process. You can meet challenges along the way, and then it's very important that you evaluate and you change your course so you can try to get the best of it as well. Yes. So it doesn't change. Yes, so on that note, we have created another breakout session because we want you to think about these challenges that I just presented, both in the case and also the theoretical notes that you've just learned. So what experiences do you have with co-creation, and what are the challenges about it, which can be prevented and how? What are we willing to let go of? What does professional quality mean when it is created collectively? And is co-creation always the right approach? And when is it not? Because it's a very good approach to many, many things, but sometimes it's not the right approach, and it certainly is not the only approach. So Mike is gonna transport you out into these break rooms again, where you get 15 minutes. I think you're all back from your discussions. If you don't mind sharing, maybe Fabio, you could be a spokesman for your group and share just briefly what you touched upon.
I was not taking notes, so I'm not unprepared. No, but we were discussing indeed the aspect of the challenges, and particularly the aspect of misaligned expectations that can arise between participants and the institution or the organization. We were discussing the relevance of like institutional framework in which the co-creation activity is conducted, whether there is an institution or a donor that can maybe set limitations in terms of budget or in terms of the kind of activities that need to be implemented, and how that can create this connection between the expectation of participants that imagine that they can essentially decide everything and will be included in the whole process, and the reality in which, on the other hand, you have to make choices, and you have to negotiate between what are the participants' expectations and what are the institutional constraints, essentially, in which you're operating. And yeah, then the conversation was quite open, so we didn't really reach a clear conclusion. If I may say, I would suggest maybe having longer breakout rooms, because 15 minutes is very short. So not everybody actually got to speak.
Yes. We'll take that in our evaluation for the next master classes. Yeah. And the other group, do you want to share something from your breakout session?
I guess I can share. We basically were continuing the same discussion what we already have in the first breakout session, because we already started to talk about our own experience, and we didn't get much further than the first 2 questions, I think, about challenges. And co-creation is really great thing to do, and we are advocating for that, and we are working in this framework. But of course, there are a lot of challenges, especially if you choose to co-create with youngsters and teenagers, and then you have, it's really time consuming, energy consuming, and we know it from experience. And also, we were discussing a bit about some practical challenges. For example, our museum is in the countryside. It's far from the cities, and if you want to organize co-creating like something, then you need to also address the practicalities, how youngsters get to your place and how much time they can spend there. And it's yeah, because our experience is specifically with working with youngsters and co-creating with youngsters together. So
Thank you so much, Baiva. Before our break, you can change the slide. I'm going to talk about ethics in co-creation, ethics and responsibility, because especially with children and young people, which is who we're going to work with in this project, it requires ethical reflection and responsibility regarding who we invite, what we ask of them, and how and why we do it. So have we asked ourselves, why are we involving these participants and who it truly benefits? Who defines what counts as good participation? Is that the adults? Is it the children? Is it the young people themselves? What do we do when the participants share something vulnerable or personal? How do we protect children's right to withdraw without shame or the need for explanation? So ethics is not just informed consent, it's continuously awareness of power relations, expectations, safety, and the rights to say no. So we have defined some principles here as well, where consent is one of them. It's about participants voluntarily or knowingly agreeing to take part in a process. It's respect for the individual integrity and rights, especially important when working with children or young people or vulnerable groups. And the ethical demand is not only to obtain consent, but is to ensure that it's understood and it can be negotiated along the way. So in co-creation, this means that one must be clear about what people are being asked to participate in. Children must be given the opportunity to say yes or no, and their condition must be adjustable. Consent is not a one-time check mark on a form, but a relational and dynamic practice. And it must be clear how much influence one will have and what participation entails. Clarity is another ethic principle where clarity is based is a basic condition for trust. Unclear processes can create insecurity and inequality because participants don't know what's expected of them or what they can expect. So in co-creation, clarity is about roles, phases, expectations, and frameworks. It's necessary for participants to act actively and, what can you say, confidentially. If something has to be decided in advance, it must be stated openly. If something is up for negotiation, that must also be communicated clearly. Framing is another thing. Good frameworks make participation possible and protect both the purpose of the process and the participants themselves. So a clear and ethical framework prevents hidden control or false openness. And in co-creation, this is about creating a space where participation can unfold meaningfully and safely. So the framework must not be so narrow that participation becomes an illusion, but it must also not be so loose that it creates insecurity. So it is possible to guide how the work takes place without controlling what should come out of it. Safety is another ethical significance. Ethical co-creation requires that the participants experience psychological and social safety, that they dare to speak, they dare to make mistakes, they dare to be creative and share their perspective without being overruled or without being judged as well. So in co-creation, this is about making an open and genuine participation, especially in groups with children or new participants. So one must actively work on building trust and building relationships, so that safety concerns both the social atmosphere and the clear structures. So spend some time on relationship building before focusing on the results. Responsibility is about who has which duties. For example, to take care of participants, to ensure a fair process, be accountable for the outcomes. Whose responsibility is that? In co-creation, it is the institution's responsibility to ensure a well-considered and safe, inclusive process. Participants must not be given responsibilities that they are not equipped to handle. Participants can be given shared responsibility, but it requires support and clarity in the framework of the process of co-creation. And then negotiation as the last principle, where in co-creation, it's not only about protection, it's about allowing room to negotiate roles, to negotiate frameworks and time and purpose. So it's a dynamic process and not a one-time fixed contract. So the process should include opportunities for adjustments along the way, especially when something is not working for participants, then you should adjust the process. Participation happens on different premises, and these must be open to be honest and transparent negotiation. And being open to negotiation shows respect for the participants' perspectives and experiences. So just a quick case from the MARC Museum. We are making a big exhibition trailer, wagon, something, designing it with children. It's hard to explain, but it's going to be this universe that can just open up and we wanted children. The purpose here is that children should be superheroes in their own history. And before we asked them to come with their perspectives and whatever they can contribute in the process, we actually had 2 or 3 workshops where we just had playtime with these children, where we played superhero games, where we build trust, we build up a relationship, we build up a communication level, all these things to ensure that the process for them was safe to work in and that they felt safe to contribute further on in the process.
Okay, hello everyone. So we're back from the break, and we're going to give you until about 25 minutes past 12 or so. So we have just a little time to round off. Jesper and I will say a little bit more about the work that we're doing, and just to ground you in the sort of perspectives that we're bringing into the workshops, and then we'll see in the end what you can use from our work as teachers and facilitators. And I think, Jesper, do you want to just kick off?
Flytte, for jeg vil gerne kunne se selv også. Vil du godt starte på den anden? Ja. Okay. As Jeppe just said, the next half an hour will try to guide you into our way of thinking, our cosmology, so to speak, and we will touch upon what was actually also presented as one of the headlines for this, the very frame of this project, how we understand regenerative thinking and regenerative learning. Yeah. So, but just to set the scene, I would like to start to say that we stand at a crossroad. The story of industrial modernity, of extraction, growth, and human exceptionalism is unraveling under ecological collapse. So we must definitely leave this destructive path and find a new life-enhancing path. I mean, that is really, that is, as we see it, not something we can just even discuss whether we need to or not. I mean, the whole situation we are experiencing with ecological collapse, climate change, and so on is demanding that we definitely find another way. Yeah. And how do we then create ways of living and working together that regenerate life-enhancing relationship with nature, with the earth and each other? That is the main sort of credo from our organization, Earthways. And part of how we do that, that actually depends on the stories we cultivate. The stories we tell about ourselves, each other, and our place in the web of life do more than describe reality, they actually shape it. Stories matter because they guide action, and stories live most powerfully when enacted, meaning that a regenerative forest garden, a regenerated watershed, a regenerated habitat is actually a lived story, is an enacted story. So it's not only, we don't not only talk about stories as oral learnings or so, but we actually also must make them into real practice. Yeah. So we say that to change the future, we must transform our way of thinking and our defining stories. And as you see here, our logo, Earthways logo, is actually mirrored as a mirror of the transformation, the metamorphosis of a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. And that is actually because we think that the transformation we face and the transformation we must undergo is as radical as the transformation from a larvae to a butterfly. So it's really, really a profound and deep transformation as we see it. And it can be expressed like that in the other picture there, where one asks, how do I become a butterfly? And then the answer is, you must want to fly so much that you are willing to give up being a caterpillar. And that is, of course, inside the caterpillar, there must be this dream of a butterfly. And in reality, it's also like that when the butterfly goes in to become the cocoon, into the pupae, it actually dissolves totally. All the cells in the caterpillar dissolves, but to be able then to recreate becoming a butterfly, there must be something which you could call imaginary cells or dreaming cells, which actually contains the dream of a butterfly. And I think, metaphorically speaking, we must have this dream within ourselves as well, also to sort of envision another way of living. Yeah. And what some of the fundamental shifts we need to make? I mean, we think that we must shift from what we could call an anthropocentric paradigm to an ecocentric or biocentric paradigm. The anthropocentric paradigm, which has actually been the guiding way of understanding for at least the Western societies for many, many years, is that man, or humans, is separate from nature. And the reason I put man is, of course, not a coincidence. It's also, if you look at the slide with the ego, then it's not humans who are placed on top, but it's actually man who is placed on top, and then you have woman a step down. So that has been the paradigm, that has been the way we understood that we then even more men were on top of creation. We were the only ones who really mattered. And we need to change that into what we could call an ecocentric paradigm, where in the green one you can see man and woman are placed as an equal part of the bigger web of life. I mean, we are not more on top of, we are embedded within this bigger web of life. And we think that this is very, very essential for us to understand and act from that perspective, that we are part of nature and that nature has rights in itself. If we do not, if we are not able to make that shift, we think that we can come up with all kinds of technological solutions and fixes, but it will not save us, it will not guide us into a more sustainable future. Yes. So how can we craft narratives that can shift the way we see and experience the world and guide another ecocentric worldview? Yeah. And how do we transform our patterns of thought and action so that the human impact on Earth shifts from being predominantly destructive to being healing, regenerative, and bringing our way of living into alignment and harmony with the basic conditions for life on Earth? That is our biggest challenge as human beings at this time in history, at this time of the evolution of life on Earth, we think. Yeah. So what do we then mean by regenerative learning? Yes. Well, regenerative comes from the Latin word regenerare, and that is derived from re and generare, meaning to bring forth, to rebirth, or to reproduce. Yes. Thus, regenerative learning means learning to recreate, restore, or rebuild something that has been lost or has fallen into decay. Yeah. But what is it that we have lost? What is it that we need to regenerate? Yeah. What we have lost is our deep connection to nature, our understanding of ourselves as part of the cycle of life, and our ability to live in reciprocity and harmony with the fundamental conditions for life on Earth, which we share with all our other life on this planet. We have lost an intuitive and sensory knowledge of nature's rhythm and processes, and knowledge that earlier cultures built their lives upon. And and we have lost a shared narrative that sees human as an integrated part of the biosphere rather than a separate ruler of it. Our economic system, educational structures, and society models are largely built on a logic of exploration rather than a regenerative understanding of how life is sustained. And that means that, I mean, our narrative, our story, the story we live by, and the story which is sort of presented to us 24/7, all the different platforms on the constant growth paradigm, on the consummation paradigm, and so on. I mean, it also infiltrates all the way down through all our system, our economic system, our educational system, our social models, and our political system. So it's very, very basic changes we need. Yeah. So regenerative, what is it? Let me just see. Oops. I'll just take it here. Regenerative learning is therefore not just about restoring damaged ecosystem or creating sustainable societies. It's also about rediscovering our senses, our presence, and our relationship with the living world. It's a movement away from separation and toward participation in the larger community of life. Yes. And how do we actually begin that process? I mean, you can illustrate the process in this way. I mean, the conventional practices, the most common practices that we are doing now, the way we farm, the way we produce, the way we use nature is, as we can experience, is doing harm. Then there are many things to are talking about, well, we should just become green. And to become green, that is just doing less harm. I mean, but as you see up there, being less bad is not being good. I mean, if I say, well, I have brought down my frequency of beating my child, my children from every once a week to every second week. That is not being good. That is just minimizing my harm. Then we talk about, and have been done that for many, many years, talk about we should become sustainable. But what we see now is not possible to sustain. And sustainable, actually, in that understanding, is only meaning doing no harm. So we had to move from the concept of sustainable. Sustainable can be the vision. That is what we are aiming at. But to be able to come to some true sustainable development, we must restore, we must do it good, and we must actually move all the way to regenerate. I mean, we can choose to do better. I put in something, I don't know if you're familiar with that in Lithuania and Latvia, the rewilding concept. That is at least the way we work with it here, is to leave nature for itself, untouched areas which we do not touch. And that, of course, is in many ways a good thing, that we need to also give nature space to be nature without interfering. But if we say that we cannot interfere, we cannot interact, then it's sort of taking human beings and ourselves out of the equation. Because we can act, as we call a keystone species, we can act life enhancing. And therefore, I think this is another much more positive way of approaching. Yeah. So in Earthways, we have developed what we call Earthways ABCD. And the reason we call it ABCD, I don't know if it is for you, but we talk about eco-literacy. And literacy means how to learn to read and write. And that is how to learn ABCD. And we have tried to translate that into more a nature-based, ecological way of learning. Yes. So we first have, our first A is, how do we create a sensory experience recognition of our connectedness to nature and the more than human? And how do we learn to observe and understand the ecological cycles of nature? We think that is really, really basic, that we begin to learn how to, and not only understand by our mind, but also by our heart, how we are embedded in nature. Yes. And then, as mentioned before we need a new story, or it's actually not even a new story, it's an old story, because the indigenous people who were living here before us and also are still living some parts of the world, they have this other story. They have this life affirming story where they see all other more than humans as kin, as relatives. So we think that we need to create this new narrative based on an ecocentric view of nature that can inspire and guide us in a new way of living in harmony with the basic conditions of Earth. Yeah. And of course, we can not only live by a story if we don't have the skills to transform it into a life-giving practice. So we must learn how we support nature's regenerative capacity and how we acquire the skills necessary to live sustainably on Earth. And finally, how do we expand our understanding of who we are to encompass and include all living things in the whole Earth community, which we are part of? And how do we create ways of living and working together that regenerate life-enhancing relationships with nature, with the Earth and each other? That is our main aim and task. And then I will give it over to you, Jeppe.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, Jesper's given sort of the background understanding, philosophy perhaps of our work. How does all this work in practice is what I'm going to talk a little bit about. I put this slide as a way of saying that, you know, obviously here we're working with a picture of the 4 elements or the elemental forces. So we have fire, air, earth, and water, as a way of talking about the patterns and the forces that are in play, and something we should really learn to understand a little bit better. That I put the rose in the middle, that's my image of the moment, of the present, because I think when we're talking about regenerative learning, we have to be mindful of always moving towards the present. So I'm going to try and do that now. If you can you stop screen sharing for a moment, and then maybe everyone can see us? So are we in the, can you see us now? Yeah, well, you should be able to see us out there. Now we can see each other, those of us who have this the video on. So this moment is a collective moment, and we have the ability to connect with technology across distances. One of the things that this technology does is that it distances ourselves a little bit, because I don't know how you work with Zoom meetings, and especially Zoom meetings that are 3 hours, but I sometimes end up turning my because I don't like to be recorded, also turning off my camera, and then I can sit and doodle a little bit, or I can send a text message to my wife about what needs to happen with the kids tonight or whatever. But it's also a very powerful technology that can connect us. And we are all present right now in this moment on this earth. It is the end of, well, let's say the beginning of autumn, really. We are right at the turn of a season here in Denmark. And I'll just invite us all to be present together in this moment for a little while. So however you do that, simply just relax and be. That's all I'm asking. So I haven't really prepared this, but let's just try and be together for a moment and recognize that we're all part of the same thing going on, whatever that is. Okay, so if we're all centered now in this moment, I'm guessing now that you're listening to the words coming out of my mouth. I'm going to try and do something slightly disruptive. So if I move down here to the end of this table, and let's say my presentation is now shifting to blindfolding myself, and I'm standing in this room. I hope you can still hear what I'm saying, but hopefully I've disrupted the whole flow of this presentation. I don't even really know what are going to be the next words coming out of my mouth. I'm just trying to illustrate the point that regenerative learning is really about trying to heighten the quality of attention of a space. So what I've done is to try and center ourselves, and then I've tried to do something unusual so that hopefully, I don't know if you're watching what I'm doing right now, but if you are, then I put myself in an unusual situation. I haven't really prepared it, but I've tried to create a moment where you're hopefully really listening. And this is the whole point about regenerative learning, is that we are trying to create spaces of learning where the quality of attention is higher, and where we pay attention to our role as teachers, and we've talked about co-creation, and to our power, and how we share or create a learning space where everyone is included. Okay, I think that was it for that slide. So you can go back to the presentation. And the next slide, I think maybe I'll skip that, because I also want to let's see if I remember right. This one is a little bit more theoretical. It's not so important. It is a very interesting perspective, though, and I'll share the article where this comes from. But it's really about what I just talked about. It also has this rose image, but a lot of us working in the creative sector, let's call it that. It's quite an ugly word, but we work with creativity, and creativity is where the new emerges. It comes from the moment, and it comes from connecting. And the way that we are working within a capitalist society, that is commodifying this creativity. And it's a really beautiful image and story, which I'll save for a different time. But if you can skip on to the next one, I'd like to talk a little bit about what does regenerative learning mean in practice, besides this aim to create learning environments that are where the quality of attention is high, and where people are engaged, where people are present and open to the moment, open to learning. Then I tried to create a sort of example course, because right now we're in a shared co-creative process. We're part of the same project. You'll end up doing some work that Jesper and I are not going to be part of it, but we can feed into it, and you're welcome to use us for whatever you can use us for. The way that we usually work is that we pay attention, like Jesper said, to the narrative and the story. And we work a lot with learning journeys. So a journey is a metaphor which works very well, especially when you're in a learning environment, because there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. There is a shared process. And then there are a lot of metaphors that we can put on this. So what are the tools that you need to bring on your journey? What are you trying to achieve? Who can help you? Who is against you? All of these aspects fit very nicely into the metaphor of the journey. So let's say now that for this project, we're going on a shared journey, and I don't know exactly what will be the cases that you are working with, but if it was our, so to say, usual setup, we would probably start with the journey, with meeting each other. So one of the key things that I learned as a teacher is that the quality of what you do together is really dependent on meeting each other right in the beginning. So there is a formative moment when everyone comes together, and I'm sure you know all this, but for me as an academic who became a teacher, this was a big discovery that the beginning of a learning journey is very important. And it's important to take the time to get to know each other. And we do this in different ways in Earthways. I'm sure you do this in different ways where you're working. But before we can move out together, we need to then meet each other. And especially the teacher, the one in power, needs to move beyond learning objectives and what we want with each other, right, to meet people where they are in their reality, to invite them into the journey. Then if we were in this course example, if we were trying to discover a locality where we were, for example, here at Mark, and Louisa has already talked about that this is quite a special place because there is this generational pollution here. So if we were going to go into the environment, this is just a thought experiment, then first of all, what we could do is to bring up what we already know. So what do we already know of the place? And here, usually we do something we call the Web of Life exercise, where we map out an ecology. And so there are some who can be a tree, there are some who can be the fields, there are some who can be the buildings, and there are some who can be the pollution, perhaps. And then we look at the connections between all of these parts of the environment. And then after that sort of more theoretical or mapping of what we already know, we would then go out into the environment. And we wouldn't always be like blindfolded with attached to a string. But it's actually quite a fun way to go out in a place that you already know, and then try and see like how well do you know it when you don't see it. And then you go out and explore the place. And here we have a lot of different ways of exercises you can do to explore, and I'm sure you have your own. We do, for example, you can do like intergenerational views of the place as well. So we have like a time machine where we talk about this place with 7 generations in between. So this is also an interesting way to start talking about what the place has been or what the place will go into. And then, of course, you can do all sorts of more, let's call it like conventional ecological, biological learning tools like BioBlitz, like starting to map what are the species here, understanding the place. And then also, besides exploring a place, we also like to bring people to be grounded in the place. And that's slightly different because grounding actually means connecting with it in a way, or bringing people to connect with a place in ways they have perhaps not done before. So it could just be sharing a moment of sitting with a particular locality, or it could be also we use sometimes writing exercises. We have a writing exercise where you actually have a conversation with a species. You bring a problem or an issue that it can be personal or it can be a group problem, and you actually ask the species for help with this. And it sounds a little bit out there, but it's very powerful. And I can tell you that I have really learned a lot from a group of ants, which I brought a question to them. And what they told me was totally unexpected, but they really had a lot to say. And I learned a lot. Okay, so after grounding in place, we go to, you could revisit the Web of Life exercise and see what layer of knowledge is added now. And then we like to work with what we call the Council of All Beings. And I think we will introduce this exercise in more detail to you in a later masterclass. This is a way of creating a council where all of the species, and this can relate to the Web of Life exercise, all of the species that you've been acknowledging are part of a habitat are brought into a council to speak their voice. So it's a way of giving voice to, let's use the word nature, or to other species. And you can do this to the more than human world. And you can do this in different ways. You can do this that they just say what's on their mind. You can also do this in a way that they speak to the human world and say, hey, humans, we actually need this from you, or we want to tell you about what we think about how you're doing. It's a very powerful exercise, which I'm sure we'll talk more about at a later date. And then we like to round off these courses or these journeys with actually finding ways to giving voice to the other. This can be species, this can be also pollution, for example. Like, what would the pollution say about this place where it's been injected into the environment? And trying to find creative practices. And this is where we work also with artists and other creatives to find ways of surfacing this knowledge. Yeah. So this is an example of a sort of example learning journey. And I'll just round off with the last slide, where I just want to give you an idea of what is the role of Jesper and I in this project. We are part of the 3 masterclasses, and we'll be here to give input from our perspective of nature-based education. We are also here as experienced hosters and facilitators. And we are here also to give you sparring and feedback on your ideas and your projects, and also to come up with actual input to what can you do, what are the exercises that we work with, how can they be tailored to your environment and your locality. And we are, I mean, we're here to be sort of like a sounding board for what you're actually working with, and we're quite excited to be part of this and to have the chance to hear what you're doing, and also as before when we were in the breakout groups, we're also here as listeners, and I think this is a really important part, because listening is also deepening the learning journey of what is going on. So this is just to give you a sort of overview of the type of work we do and how you could use us if you choose to do so in this project. And we'll be giving more input in the next masterclass. But for now, I think we're probably landing at a place where it's good to round off the day and to talk about a little bit about what the next masterclasses will entail.
Yes, and thank you so much for your input at Earthways. And as Jeppe rightfully said, then we're gonna meet again for the next masterclass number 2 at the 3rd of November. Same time, you will receive a link in an email with more notes. Next time, we're gonna dive more into methods and designing our own workshops that we're gonna have in the springtime. And for that, we need you to do a little bit of homework. We're gonna write it down as well in the email with the link, but we're gonna mention it here just to be fair about it when we have the audacity to give you homework. And this is about a case. And in this project, we have a case in Denmark at Mark Museum, we have a case in Lithuania, and we have a case in Latvia. And for the next time, we need to have chosen a case or a possible case that we want to work with the young people when we are going to have co-creation workshops and this regenerative way of thinking workshops in the springtime. So in this case, we need to think about presenting the case. We're going to have time to do that, each case partner at the next masterclass. So when you choose a case, we need to present what kind of local history or heritage does this case contain? And in which context is this case in? So which nature or landscape, or where are you situated or placed when we're gonna have this case? So, and you are welcome to do this in pictures, just like maybe the picture that we shared of where Mark Museum is located in the beginning of this masterclass. So that we can all have an understanding, because we're going to work with this case in the next masterclass. Does this make sense? We're going to write it more cleverly down than I was able to pronounce today in the email. But do you have something to add to the homework? Jeppe, Jesper, Mike? No?
No, I don't think so. Don't be scared about the word homework. It doesn't take long. It's just answering 3 or 4
questions and
Yeah.
Bringing some pictures to the next masterclass. It will take about what, 15 minutes, 20 minutes to make
something like that.
something like that. Because then we're going to dive down into designing specifically methods and cases in the different cases for the workshops in the springtime.
But also, I mean, if you could present your locality where your case is taking place, that would be very helpful if you can do it also visually for us who are not familiar with that place, if we should sort of participate in commenting on or advising on this case. Yeah.
Yes. So next masterclass is the 3rd of November. We're gonna send out emails with links and with the homework assignment. And it's gonna be about diving into some concrete methods that we can make use of, and then start designing our own workshops from our own cases. Yeah? And now we have 5 minutes left for questions or reflections. Any comments?
Couldn't we make it just a short round where you sort of reflect very shortly on the day? Yeah.
I can see the first one on our list is Baiba. Do you have any reflections for today?
Just thank you for the session, and it give more clarity about what we should do and what direction we should think, and yeah, that's it, I guess.
Okay, thank you. And Fabio?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. This was really, really interesting, very well structured, lots of information. I wanted to ask if you will share the slides, because there were really like a lot of conceptual points to really digest. I was trying to take notes, but but it does warrant a rereading. I'm especially interested and fascinated in the ethical aspect, because we, as Save the Children, we also have our set of ethical principles for meaningful and ethical, well, in our case, child participation, obviously. And it was interesting to see just how much it relates, and it very much dovetails with what you were talking. But everything you presented was really very interesting indeed.
And Ruta?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I also just want to thank you for this masterclass, because I fully agree, excuse me, with Baiba, that it helped to clarify and to understand better our project. And I'm already waiting for another masterclass. I will try to do homework. Yeah, and that's it.
Thank you. Ekaterina?
Yes, it was interesting glimpse into what is going to happen next. And from our organization, we are mostly interested in these methods. Also listening to the Earthways presentation, thought about forest bathing, which is very popular, super popular methodology in Lithuania at this moment, exactly focusing on the experience of environment through all the senses. So we really have this super trend, which is not, we didn't reach, I would say, urban surroundings, urban environment yet. It's mostly focused on forests. And also considering your homework, I think that it puts on us, as on the organizations coming from various fields, also obligation to somehow to catch up with time, you know, to meet and to clarify what kind of case we're going to pick. So it requires extra time from all three organizations. So with Fabio's organization and Rutas and Agnes museum, I think maybe we're going just to visit museum and to look around what kind of spaces and practices we could pick. So we should be in touch till this November 3rd. So it's up to if organizations will find time. Otherwise, we're coming with some examples coming from each different fields. So I just want to clarify if I understood you right, that you need for the homework, you need the case which is going to be, which we are going to work with next, I mean, in springtime, right? So it should be more or less real case.
Yes.
The real
Yes.
place, yes.
I think if you need any help from our hand, we can have a separate meeting if you need help selecting something or have any questions.
And Mark Museum is gonna select a case as well. So we're gonna have 2 roles in the next masterclass. We're gonna be presenters and participants.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will make our small group to discuss it. I think to find some time to visit maybe Marcucci Museum then. Thank you.
Please do visit.
Okay, thank you, Agnes.
And Andra?
Yeah, thank you for the very nice presentation and ideas and very inspiring. And I thought about some ideas which we could use and what part of heritage we could use, but we should talk and decide how we will work. And yes, there is a lot of information, but I should one more to see and think about it. But thank you very, very much.
Thank you. And the last one, Aune? Agne? Maybe I'm pronouncing it wrong.
No,
Sorry.
it's fine. It's fine. I have different names in every country. So yes, I want to thank you as well because it was very clear and quite structured, and it gave us a bit time to talk. I listened mostly, but at the same time, I think this homework, this task for the next meeting will sort of open up more our own identity and how we stand within this project. I'm not sure I fully understood it, but I think after I read the letter that you send us, then I'll fully engage into what it is. But we can use technology, right, to sort of land it on the map. Yeah, great. I see you nodding. Great. Thanks. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who joined as well from other places online. It was nice to see how widely spread it is.
Thank you. And from the 4 of us, we just want to thank you for being such great participants in our masterclass number 1. And we're looking forward to seeing you again in a fortnight for masterclass number 2.
And if you have any questions, you just reach out and we'll try to help you in your homework process. Okay.
Okay. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.